Now, developing the web application using the deployment descriptor. This deployment descriptor basically it contains all configuration related information with respect to your web application. Deployment descriptor, I repeat, will contain all the configuration related information with respect to the application. Let's say, okay, we are having a URL. You're having a URL and you're having the servlet. This is what we have. For the URL login, we are invoking login servlet. Let's say if the URL is registered, then we are invoking register servlet. By this, okay, we understand that there is some sort of mapping between the URL and the servlet. That is why, okay, if you are specifying the URL as login, it is invoking the login servlet. And if you are specifying the URL as register, then it is invoking the register servlet. By this, we can understand that there is some sort of mapping between the URL pattern and in the servlet. Now, where are we? So, where do we specify this mapping? We specify these mappings in deployment descriptor. We specify this mapping in the deployment descriptor. So what we can say is your deployment descriptor will contain the mappings, will contain the configuration related information. Configuration related information about the web application. Now let us have a look at this. So simple servlets are activated by using the fully qualified. Multiple unrelated servlets are placed into the same directory of the web server. Many common services such as security authorization are ported from the strap. Okay. Over here, what we are specifying is so simple web application means okay, you will put all the servlets in one folder. What we have done, whereas over here, okay, in the multiple web application, this is the root of your web application. So the root of the web application will contain more than one directory structure. This is the web application context. That is the root of the application. Over here, you're having one is leaks, the other one is admin. Two modules we have, one is league module and other one is admin module. Now deployment descriptor, if we have a look at this, now whenever you're writing the code for the deployment descriptor, there are actually three parts in it. One is the client known URL name, and the another one is the deployer known secret internal name, and then the actual file name. So how this happens is, first is the deployer will give some name, sorry, the sign up servlet. The developer will give some name to the class. You will have a separate team. So people who are responsible for developing the code and the people those who are responsible for deployment of the code. These two are two different sets of teams in the real-time environment. People who develop the code are different and people who deploy the code is different. So we have got a separate team for developing and we've got a separate team for deployment. So developer will write the code. Developer will write the code and the code that is written by the developer is given to the deployer. So now when the sign up code, now the developer has given the name as sign up servlet. The developer has given the name as sign up servlet. When this sign up servlet has been given to the deployer, the alternate name, they will give an alternate name to the servlet. So the alternate name that they are giving to the servlet is enroll servlet. And the deployer, along with giving the alternate name to the servlet, along with that, they will decide the pattern, the URL pattern for this. So then the URL pattern will be used by the client to access the servlets. Now, over here, okay, we have got the developer, we have got deployer, and then the client. Now, let's say, okay, you have written a log, developer has created a login class, login servlet. Now, to this login servlet, okay, this is how it works. Servlet class is com.example.login, and the alternate name what they are giving to this servlet is authentication. So this name is then passed to the deployer, this one. So this is the name you have given, the alias name. Servlet, the actual name is com.example.login and then the alias name what we have given is authentication. So this alias name is passed to this deployer. So the deployer what it does is to this alias name, for this alias name it creates a URL pattern login.to. For this alias name, the deployer has given the URL pattern. And then the client, when the client wants to access your login servlet, then they will access it through this code login.do. Clear with this?
I think a question.
Hmm?
So yesterday when we did the example, we didn't do all this, but the servlet was still accessible.
Yes. There are two
How
ways.
did that work?
There are two ways of doing this. One is by writing these annotations this way. So over here, okay, you can configure name is equal to authentication and URL patterns. So for configuration, okay, we have got two options. Either you can make use of the annotation or you can make use of the deployment descriptor.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
So your web deployment descriptor is present in this web.init folder. Expand this over here, you have got web.xml. Now over here we did not write any configuration related. Over here we just find only one thing, that is welcome file list. That is when you are starting up the application, what should be your landing page? What should be the landing page when you're starting the application? I want index.jsp to be the landing page. So this is how I do. Now over here In order to configure, you have got servlet name, the element what we have is servlet. Under this, the fully qualified name. So the fully qualified name is com.example.controller.login. So com.example.controller. And the alternate name what we are giving to this servlet is and then okay, the next element what we have is servlet mapping. This servlet mapping, it has got two child elements. One is servlet name, that is you are creating the mapping for this authentication servlet, and its URL pattern what we are deciding is login.do. And then okay, you're having one more servlet over here, you will repeat the same name. So either you can go with the web.xml or you can go with this. If you're going with the web.xml, remove this. So we have configured this. Let me go to this index.jsp page. Over here, this URL pattern and this one should match. Over here also you should add it login.do. So because this form is the client to the servlet, this form is client to the servlet. So you can say, so this client, so this one is the client to the servlet. What we require is this one. So this one again is client. This one is the URL. This is the URL pattern. So this one, this login.do, this is the URL pattern. Let me just give it some more time. Clear with this? So this and this should match. Clear with this? Any doubt? So that's all. Okay, now let us run it. So over here, if you see, this is a URL pattern login.tool. Now next what we have is servlet lifecycle. Now in the servlet lifecycles we have got three methods: init, service, and in the destroy. Hey Mark, can you just let me know if the section of the code you want it to be repeated?
I think my concern was the development and the deployment codes will be in the same code, like you have one HTML session, JSP files, and there is another code. So the mapping code and the servlet code is in the same file, right? Same page?
I didn't get your question.
Okay. Do you mind to go back to the code? I'm gonna show you what I'm asking.
Which one? This one? This one file we have, and then this is the another file we have, index.jsp.
Well,
The deployment part of code, Atika, you have written, right? Like with the registration thing or in the login thing. Can you go to login.java?
Okay.
You have written that annotation part, right? Where is that one? The
Because we
where
have
we
written
write
that
it's
in the web.xml file, so that is the
okay.
one I have removed from here. So either you can configure in web.xml file or you can make use of the annotations.
In the direct class file, right?
Yes.
So
Oh, here the
it will be
hmm.
when even the deployer will be, we can use it in any either way, like we can write it as an XML file or we can write it directly in the class file also.
Yes, both the ways you can write.
Okay, thank you, I got it clear.
Okay, welcome. Roma, your question?
okay, Atika, my concern was um, okay, so see, you have created the JSP file. Now login.java, um, where you going to write down that mapping code? Where is the mapping code?
The mapping code, okay, we have moved it to web.xml file. So you will find the web.xml file in the web content folder. If you expand web content, within that, okay, you have one more folder called web information. And over here you have a file called web.xml file. So the mapping we have moved it to web.xml. So this web.xml file is called as deployment descriptor. It will have all the configuration related information with respect to your web application. So mapping URL patterns to the servlet will come under configuration, and that code we are writing it in servlet. We are writing it in web.xml file. So this is the web.xml file. Here we are writing this code. This is your web.xml file. So the configuration, so the mapping code we are moving over here.
So Atika, let me because okay, let me ask you this. So if you go to the if I would go to the yahoo.com, when you go to the yahoo.com and the first page will pop up as username or login.
Mhm.
So as a developer, you gotta make username servlet, password servlet, login servlet. That's what you're saying.
Yes.
So each and okay, and So you gotta create each and every servlet and the JSP file just to have the screen on. So whatever the client will see, that would be on JSP file, right?
Yes.
So how come this web information that the mapping concept come in between, which I didn't got it?
Okay. So index.jsp we have, and this index.jsp, as you said, we are connecting to the backend servlet. So how this front end is getting mapped to backend? Is this the question?
Yes.
Okay. How are we mapping the front end to the backend? So we are mapping front end to the backend with the help of web.xml file. Now over here in the front end, that is, the client will see the screen login.do. So if in case if you see, if I am executing this, now this is the screen that is being seen. If you press control U, you can see the source code, what we have written over here. The same source code is available. Now when you're hitting this form, this request will go to this login.do. This request will go to login.do. So this is the client side code. So this is the client. So when you hit into the submit button, the request will go to the login.do. So that information you are providing it in servlet. Sorry, in web.xml. So over here you have this web.xml file. Over here we have. So this is how your request will travel. So when you hit into this form, your form parameter, so your form action as login.do. So it will come to this, it will check for this URL pattern, login.do. For that, okay, it finds that there is the servlet is authentication, and then okay, it will check, it will execute this class. This is first, then it will check what is the alias name, then third, okay, it will go, okay, it will check, it will verify that this is mapping with this, and then it will execute this class. So mapping information front end is being mapped to backend with the help of configuration, that is with the help of deployment descriptor. In the configuration file or in deployment descriptor, we are mapping front end to the backend. Clear with this? Now servlet, it has got three lifecycle methods. One is init, service, and then the destroy. Init is used for initializing the resources, whereas destroy is used for releasing the resources. Init and destroy method is called only once during the life cycle of the servlet, whereas service method is called for the each client request. If you want, okay, you can override init method and you can override the destroy method. So init method is called by the web container when the servlet instance is first created. So the servlet specification guarantees that no request will be processed by the servlet until the init method is executed. You can override the init method in your servlet if you want some information to be initialized before you start servicing the clients. Now, in the service method, you will override either do get or do post or do put or do delete, okay, any of these methods. So the service method, it is called by the container for each client request. In the service method, we write the logic for processing the client request. Whereas in the destroy method, you will write the logic for releasing the resources which you have initialized in the init method. So before the container removes the servlet from the servlet container, the container will invoke the destroy method. container will invoke the destroy method before it removes the servlet from the servlet engine. Now servlet and all you have. Now let us go to PPT.
Atika, can we override service method also or no?
Yes, we can override.
So if you override service method, then let call do get and do post afterwards, or we need to explicitly call it.
Okay. You just give me a minute. Okay, I'll show you that with the help of an example. Now over here, this is your server and this is the web container. When you're deploying the web application at that point of time, the container will read the deployment descriptor, that is your web.xml file. So after it reads the web.xml file, it will find out, it will load all the servlet classes. It depends. So your servlet classes might be loaded at the time of deployment. So your container, first it will load the servlet class, that is login class. Then it will call the constructor for that. After it calls the constructor, we discuss that the servlet has got three lifecycle methods. One is init, second one is service, third one is destroy. So your container will create an object that is servlet config object. Servlet config object will contain all configuration related information about the servlet. Now in the servlet config, what it does it, in the servlet config object, you can store the parameters as the key and the value pair. Let's say okay, over here, you're storing email is equal to test at the rate of gmail.com. So over here, if you want some information to be stored in the servlet config object, then you can do it with the help of initialization parameter. So init param, it takes two elements. One is param name and the second one is param value. So when the container, when it reads this web.xml and after it creates the servlet config object for this servlet. I repeat, first the container will read this web.xml file. After it reads the web.xml file, it will try to create an instance of the servlet. So the steps what we have or the process which the container follows to create an instance of the servlet is, first it will load your class. The login servlet class .class file is loaded in the container. After .class file is loaded in the container, then the constructor will call the constructor of the login servlet. After it creates an object for the login servlet, then the container will create another object called servlet config. This servlet config object is created by the container and it is created only once during the servlet lifecycle, and it creates one servlet config object per servlet. Now in this servlet config object, it can contain some configuration related information. Over here I want to store email is equal to test at the rate gmail.com in the servlet config. So over here, if what I can do is, if I want to store this information, then I need to mention that in the web.xml file. So for this, we have got another element called init param. This init param element, it takes two values. One is param name and the second one is param value. It is key and then the value pair. So key your email and the value what we are providing is test at the rate gmail.com. After it does this, your container will call the init method and it passes the servlet config object. And after this, now for each client request, if you see the client request is coming login.do. So for each client request, the container will call the service method. The container will call the init method only once. And second time the client request is coming, again it calls the service method. And login app do, again it invokes the servlet to service method. So for each client request, the container calls the service method. And then when you are undeploying the servlet, then the container will call the destroy method. When you're shutting down the application, or when you're shutting down the Tomcat server, or when you're shutting down the application, the container will call the destroy method. Init and destroy method is called only once during the life cycle of the servlet, whereas service method is called for each client request. So it reads this. So first init you have, whereas service method, if you see, for each client init is called only once, and the service method is called for each client request, and the destroy method is called only once. So init and the destroy method are called only once, whereas service method is called for the each client request. You can override init as well as destroy method. So over here you are overriding it. Now public class login servlet extends HTTP servlet. Now over here the container will create a servlet config object. After the container creates a servlet config object, it will check if there are any initialization parameters. If it finds the initialization parameter element in the servlet element, it will read that, and that it will store it in the file. 1 minute. So, So the container, if you see, okay, this servlet config object it is creating, and in the container it will read this file, servlet this one. So if in case if there are any initialization parameters, then it will read those parameters and it will store it in the servlet config object. Now the next what we have is, then the container will then the container will call the init method. This init method will have access to the servlet config object. So this init method has got access to the servlet config object. If I want to read this configuration and related information into the servlet, then the servlet config object, it provides you with the method getInit parameter. So if you're invoking getInit parameter method on the config object, it will retrieve the value for you. So config.getInit parameter of email, if you write, then it is going to return its value test@gmail.com. Now after this, it has read this. Now for each client request, if you see, it is calling the do get or do post method. Init method is called only once, and for each client request it calls either do get or do post. When you're shutting down the application or when you're undeploying, it is going to call the destroy method. Any questions on this? Is it clear? Okay. Now over here in the same servlet, you will write init param. So this init param element, it takes two child elements, param name, email, and then param value, webmaster@gmail.com. Let's say we have written this. Now let me go back to this login servlet. Now over here we have overridden only do post method. Now let us override init as well as destroy. So this is the signature. So this is the init method, and next what we have is public void destroy. So we have got init and then the destroy. Let me write over here service method. And over here you can specify one more parameter called load on startup. One. Okay, specifying this parameter load on startup as one, then when you are deploying the application, then at that point itself it will initialize, it will load the servlet in the servlet container. So right click, run as, let us have a look at the output. Now over here if you see init method. So first init method is called, then let's say okay you're writing this, then the service method is called do get or do post. I'm refreshing this. For each client request it will call the do get method. See over here, if you are refreshing, right, for each client request it will call the do get or do post method. The next thing is okay when you are undeploying the servlet. So you can undeploy the servlet by going to the server tab. If you expand this, it will list the servlets that are deployed on the server. So this is the application that is deployed. I can select it and let me click it, remove. So we don't have anything. So over here if you see, okay, destroy method. So init method is called only once. and the destroy method is also called only once. Init method is called when you're deploying it or on the first client request, whereas service method is called for each client request. So your service method will either call doGet or doPost, and then the destroy method is also called only once during the life cycle of the servlet. And let's say, okay, you have to retrieve this information. And print it. So you can access it. So let us execute it one more time. And you're deploying the servlet. So you can see the servlet is deployed onto the web container. So init method, you have read the init param. It is calling the service method. And you can undeploy it. And if you undeploy, when you undeploy the server, it will remove the information. It is not mandatory to override the do init and then the destroy method. It is optional. If in case if you want to override, if you want to initialize some resources before you start servicing the client, then you can go with the init method, or else okay, you can just omit it because it is not mandatory to override init and the destroy method.
So, I think how do we do with the service method? Right that?
Okay. Now let us work on the service method. Where did the service method comes into picture is, now let us create one more servlet. Create servlet class. So implements servlet. The servlet, as we have discussed, it is an interface. Servlet, it is an interface. javax.servlet.servlet. So you can create the servlet either by extending the HTTP servlet, or you can create the servlet by implementing this interface, your choice. Now this one, because as this is an interface, it has got 5 methods which you need to implement. So over here if you see service method, init, service, and then the destroy method we have. Clear with this? Servlet config and then get servlet information. And then okay, if you observe over here, you have got these 3 methods, init, service, and then the destroy method. So if you have a look at the client API, if you have a look at the API, if you see over here, you have got servlet. This is an interface. It has got the methods init, service, and in the destroy. Then the generic servlet, okay, the generic servlet, it is overriding, it is implementing your servlet interface. Generic servlet is implementing the servlet interface. And over here, okay, you will introduce two additional methods. One is do get and the other one is do post. Over here, we introduced two more additional methods. One is do get and the other one is do post. So over here you see do get and do post you have. So what are we doing is we are overriding do get or do post.
So from a JSP page, we cannot call a generic sublet. We can.
Can you repeat your question?
From a JSP page or HTML page, can we call a generic sublet
Yeah.
or HTTP only? Oh, generic also.
Yeah.
Because the generic doesn't have the generic we saw doesn't have do get do.
Yes. So, so all the time it will call you do this one only. What
Service
is
method.
that? It will call the service method all the time.
So you mean in the HTTP servlet class, they have already written a service method that actually calls internally to get.
Yes, correct.
Okay. Okay.
So over here, let us just print it. This is out. So we generally, okay, whenever we're writing the code, okay, we don't implement the servlet. So rather, okay, we go with extends HTTP servlet because this will have more features than your basic servlet interface. But if you want to work with some of the protocols other than HTTP, then you need to go either with the generic servlet or with the HTTP servlet, either of the two. Okay, fine. So this is clear. Now next what we will discuss is and the web container will create one servlet config object per servlet. Next what we have is servlet context. So the web application is a self-contained. So simple, okay, your web application will contain your static pages as well as dynamic pages. So your HTML pages will come under static and the dynamic stuff will come under your JSP as well as servlets. And the web application deployment descriptor is used to specify the structure and the services which we have already discussed. And servlet context object is the runtime representation of the web application. So servlet config, it represents the instance of the servlet, whereas servlet context, it represents the runtime structure or the runtime the context of the web application. Or you can say runtime environment. So when I say the servlet context object is going to represent the runtime environment of the server, that is, it is going to report which API you are using, that is on which application your server is running, what is the duration of time for which the server was on. So all this information will be present or can be accessed with the help of servlet context. So your servlet context, it is an actual representation of the web application, and it has got all the contextual information related to servlets. So servlet has access to the servlet context object to the get servlet. So mainly over here, read-only access to the context initialization. Obviously, you cannot modify that. So if you want to share some data at the application level, so read-only access to application level file resources, write access to the application level log file. So your servlet context object, it will provide read-only access to the context initialization parameters, and read-write access to the application level, and read-only access to the application level resources, and write access to the application level log file. So this is what the servlet context does. So in order to declare the context, so this is how you're writing. Context param, catalog file name, we are storing that under webinf catalog text. Now if you want to retrieve the catalog file name in the web application, so first you need to get reference to the servlet context. So once you get reference to the servlet context, over here servlet context is equal to servlet context event dot get servlet context. So once you get reference to this, you can retrieve the file name context dot get file name of catalog one file name. So it is going to return this. So this is what catalog file name is this. Clear with this? Okay, to Roma and Sarfaraz it is clear. So let me again go to this web.xml and add context param. So context file name, web hyphen inf hyphen some message dot text. So this context param, it is application wide. Servlet config is applicable only to one servlet, whereas servlet context, it can be accessed. It is one per web application and can be accessed by all the server components. So if I have to retrieve this, then first I need to get a reference to the servlet context object and then invoke get it in parameter method on the servlet context object. So how do we do this? So servlet context is equal to get servlet context. So once you get the servlet context object, you can write there. You can retrieve it. String email is equal to, what is that? We have written file. So email is equal to context dot get init parameter of file name. Email is equal to plus email. You just need to retrieve. So I just, for any queries, you can specify for any queries contact contact the email. So you should be able to access this. Right click on the sample website, select run as. Clear with this? Now let's say, okay, let us type some stuff. tom@gmail.com, submit query, null pointer exception. I think this and this does not matches. Okay, so this we have written it as email. Oh, so some data. Oh, there is some error. Let us check it. Clear with this? For any queries, contact null. You will get null if this and this does not matches. What are we doing over here? The file name, I changed it to email. So email is equal to webmaster@gmail.com, and then okay, it will call the service method. So you have got one context pattern for web application, and this context pattern will store the runtime information. So now what do we mean by this runtime information about the web application? Let us understand. So it will have the record of now over here. Once you get this, then out.println of, let me put a break rule, then out.println which server you're using, that is your web application is running in which server. So what do we have over here? Context dot get server info. Then similarly out.println, what is that? Context. Now what is the API you are using? Servlet API. What is being used? Context dot get major version or get minor version. So this will return you the API. Context dot. What is the context name of the web app? Now, so it should print that into the web page. See over here, server is this, servlet API you're using 3, and then the context name what we have is sample website. So basically servlet context, it is one per application, and it is used to represent the runtime representation of the web content. And you can access all the environment details, that is the server name, the API you are using, the context part. So this we can access it, the runtime variables, we can access it with the help of the servlet context object. Is this clear? with this, we have completed up to servlet context. And the next module what we have to start is with the we have to cover request dispatcher. After that, okay, we'll continue with the web MVC. And I have sent you a PDF file that is good. One exercise, the exercise what we have discussed yesterday. If you are able to complete one, in well and good. If in case if you are unable to complete that, please go through that exercise. Step by step instructions are given. You'll be able to complete it on your own. So with this, okay, we'll wind up this session for today. We'll continue with the web MVC application in the next class.